I am ready. All right, microphone check one, two. What is this? Shifting Paradigms with your host B. Michael. I'm here on KUAW, Knowledge, Understanding, and Wisdom Radio, brought to you by the Black Family Technology Awareness Association. Always keeping it up and holding it down with Baba G on the soundboard. I'm gonna always give a shout out to Baba G for holding it down and keeping it up. So shifting paradigms, we're going to get into some interesting programming today. But first, our mission is always to stimulate critical thought in order to realistically redefine our reality, our narrative, and to positively reshape our reality through dialogue with self-determination. And so today, just been kind of brewing on some things, some thoughts that have been going on for things in the media. And the program that I came up with today is called it's called let me look at it real quick. Propaganda. There it goes. Propaganda in Predictive Programming Paradigmatics. And this is dealing with things that stem back to the Grammys, where we're looking at the performance by Cardi B and Meg Thee Stallion. We're also going to take a look at what's going on with Lil Nas X, some things that he's recently come out with. Just looking at a couple of things that take place in the media that's really just, challenging perspectives and challenging norms and challenging values and mores that are, just present. The weekend's performance at the Super Bowl, going back to the month of February, just looking at some things and some subliminal messages that are present within those things. And I want to frame this by dedicating the show to one of my favorite comedians, who is Dave Chappelle. And just to give a little background of why I want to dedicate this show to Dave Chappelle, back in '06, he spoke with a James Lipton for Inside the Actor Studio. And during the interview, Chappelle, he shared some insights on the dismissive and sick culture within Hollywood. And this, he says, allowed for many celebrities to be dismissed as just crazy. He spoke about the destructive culture that Hollywood can be, and how a '96 incident where Bad Boy star Martin Lawrence's 96 ran into the streets of LA with a loaded gun as an example, talking about, they're trying to kill me, they're trying to kill me. Chappelle said Lawrence made him feel inspired over his career. And of course, he was successful around that time at the height of his career, but there was also a dark side, he says, to Lawrence's success. He explained that a little while after his movie Blue Street came out, that he had a stroke, that he almost died. Martin Lawrence did. And Chappelle said that Lawrence told him that when he was actually resting from his hospitalization, he got the best sleep he ever got in his life. He just was able to rest. And so then in experiencing that, Chappelle asked the question, was like, what is it that's going on in Hollywood to make a guy like Martin Lawrence, who is so tough, to be on the street waving a gun, screaming they're trying to kill me? He's like, what's going on? Then he asked, why did he go to Africa? Why did Chappelle leave his multi-million-dollar contract to go to Africa? Right? And then he asked, why does Mariah Carey go on to make $100 million deal and then go about taking off her clothes on TRL Live on MTV? He says a weak person cannot get to sit where he was sitting at that day on the Actors Guild and talk to you, because he says there's no weak people who are willing to talk to you about this stuff. So he says what's happening in Hollywood, no one knows. No one knows what's going on in Hollywood. He says the worst thing to call somebody is crazy is dismissive. He says, I don't understand this person, so they're crazy. That's BS. People are not crazy. They're strong people. And maybe, he says, the Hollywood environment is a little sick. And we've been getting exposed to things like Harvey Weinstein and what his behaviors were like, and to all these different accusations of molestation, child molestation, and other types of things that are going on in Hollywood, and that it has some dark sides to it. But I bring that up because Hollywood is one of the main propagators of values, of agendas, of perspectives, and the purveyor of this type of information. And so as master propagandists and predictive programmers, we have to take a look at that particular lens. Now, let me quote one of the most significant social engineers in the United States. His name is David Rockefeller. David Rockefeller understands how to use the media, not just Hollywood, but also we'll see how periodicals such as the Washington Post and Time Magazine and New York Times have come to factor into what this agenda is all about. Because propaganda is intent, and we'll get to the definition of that, of conveying an agenda. And these agendas are very, very significant as relates to accomplishing goals and outcomes, if you will. And so in taking a look at what David Rockefeller said, I want to read to you this quote after I get this situated. Give me one moment. I want to get something situated here. But I do want to read to you this quote from David Rockefeller. Rockefeller says, for more than a century, ideological extremists at either end of the political spectrum have seized upon well-publicized incidents, such as his encounter with Castro, this is David Rockefeller speaking, to attack the Rockefeller family for the inordinate influence they claim we wield over American political and economic institutions. Some even believe that we are a part of a secret cabal, David Rockefeller says, working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that's the charge, he says, I stand guilty and I am proud of it. He says, we are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would be impossible. It would be impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subjected to the lights of publicity during those years. But the world is more sophisticated and prepared to march towards a one world government. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers are surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in past centuries. David Rockefeller from his memoirs. And this is confirmed by the late President John F. Kennedy in his correspondence dinner in the 60s, where he talks about the word secrecy is repugnant to an open society. And he goes on to talk about these circles of influence that are hidden in the global sphere and the global board of geopolitical affairs, but who use their influence to bring forth this reality that they're seeking to create, which is one of the reasons why he was assassinated, not only for just putting the dollar back on the silver unit or the silver standard when he was shot in Dallas, but because of his exposure of this unseen hand that does exist, that in fact does exist. And so when we look at what information is being conveyed through Hollywood and through these other outlets, if you will, we have to understand what truly propaganda is and what it's about. So the definition of propaganda is information, especially of a biased or misleading nature, used to promote or publicize a particular political cause or points of view. So it is a biased or misleading nature that promotes some type of point of view or political cause. And so they use media outlets to propagate this and to just make it that much more prominent in society, where these views that are coming through these outlets, be it television, radio, print media, whatever media it is that's being used to persuade the public through suggestion, really not through telling you what to do, but through suggestion that actually empowers you, or excuse me, empowers the social engineers to have that agenda fulfilled by those who really subject themselves to that particular suggestion. And that's what propaganda is all about. And so when we go back to the early 20th century, there's a man by the name of Edward Bernays. He's often referred to as the father of public relations. And in 1928, he published his seminal work, which is called Propaganda, in which he argued that public relations is not a gimmick, but a necessity. He is quoted as saying, "The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society." Let me repeat that. That is a very profound sentence. He says the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. And what you have to understand about democracy, one thing first and foremost, is that America is not a democracy. On paper, America is a republic. It is not a democracy. You say that every time that individuals who say the Pledge of Allegiance make that proclamation. Into the republic for which it stands. It does not say into the democracy for which it stands. It says into the republic for which it stands. Now, what we have to understand is the difference between a republic and a democracy is that in a republic, it is established upon the rule of law. And the rule of law determines the outcomes of that society. Whereas in a democracy, it is the rule of the majority that establishes the outcome of society, and that can be persuaded and moved into an ultimate dictatorship. That is the previous step before a dictatorship is a democracy. And you can look up in the annals of history and political science to see how that unfolds. And so when we understand how these machinations work and how these systems are truly to work, well, we have to understand how the information that is being promoted in these societies is bent towards causing people to be persuaded to lean and behave in certain ways. And so again, the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. He says we are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes are formed, and our ideas suggested largely by men we have never heard of. It is they who pull the wires that control the public mind. And this is the father of marketing or public relations in the United States, Edward Bernays, who I believe was an Austrian. And so he came from Austria and he comes to the United States to influence public opinion and to use that in a political sense. Very important to notate. I want to go to another early 20th century writer. His name was Ardex Huxley. Ardex Huxley is most famously known for the book Brave New World. Brave New World is a ominous forecast of a society that would be influenced by pharmaceuticals. It would be largely a sexless society in the sense that reproduction is now done through artificial insemination. It is about having a dominant political presence, big government, if you will, and it really just is some would say a forecast to make people aware of what he saw coming to society as a result of things such as propaganda, science, and politics, and you using these things all together. But this is an excerpt from a book that he calls Brave New World Revisited. And this is Propaganda in Democracy. This is a chapter in the Brave New World Revisited called Propaganda in a Democracy. He says there are two kinds of propaganda: rational propaganda in favor of action that is consonant with the enlightened interest of those who make it and to those whom it is addressed, and non-rational propaganda that is not consonant with anybody's enlightened self-interest, but is dictated by and appeals to passion. So one is an enlightened type of propaganda that is based on, you know, the information that will cause individuals to be informed about what that information is leading to, whereas you have another type of propaganda that is disconsonant with that, that causes individuals to just be ruled and governed by passion. One group is being informed to be governed by your reason, your intellect. The other one is being ruled and governed by your emotions and your desires. Okay, that's what the propaganda is doing. And so for those of us who are television watchers and some different types of music listeners, we are bombarded by information that is going to stimulate our passions as opposed to our intellect and our reason. Okay, he goes on to say, where the actions of individuals are concerned, there are motives more exalted than enlightened self-interest. But where collective action has to be taken in the field of politics and economics, enlightened self-interest is probably the highest of effective motives. So this is letting us know that if we are not operating by enlightened self-interest, not just self-interest, but collective interest, then we will always be bamboozled, run astray, led amok, right? Led amok, run astray, right? This is important because the thing about entertainment is that it is to distract and divert your attention from one thing that is more important to something that is more trivial, okay? He goes on to say, if politicians and their constituents always acted to promote their own or their country's long-range self-interest, this earth would be an earthly paradise. This world would be an earthly paradise. If these politicians were truly altruistic in promoting long-range interests of not only themselves, but also the country, as opposed to just being cynical, this world would be a completely different place. But because those in power are being manipulated by those who put those resources in their pockets and want their agenda fulfilled and control the outlets that promote the information, well, we see the result of that. As it is, Ardex Huxley goes on to say, they often act against their own interests merely to gratify their least creditable passions. The world, in consequence, now is a place of misery. Propaganda in favor of action that is consonant with enlightened self-interest appeals to reason by means of logical arguments based upon the best available evidence, fully and honestly set forth. So we have to understand what is logical. We have to understand what is evidential. We have to understand what is honest and true and sincere. But what is happening is we are being completely deluded by illusions, and we're being led astray by passions. I do what I feel I want to do is what the world wants to do. I'm doing what I feel, not what I know and believe and think to be right. Propaganda in favor of action, dictated by the impulses that are below self-interest, offers false, garbled, and incomplete evidence. It avoids logical argument and seeks to influence its victims by the mere repetition of catchwords, by the furious denunciation of foreign or domestic scapegoats, which we're seeing in the media now, and by cunningly associating the lowest passions with the highest ideals, so that atrocities come to be perpetrated in the name of God, and the most cynical kind of realpolitik is treated as a matter of religious principle and patriotic duty. That again is Ardex Huxley from his Brave New World Revisited, from a chapter that he calls Propaganda in Democracy. And this is Shifting Paradigms. I'm your host, B. Michael. You're here on KUAW, Knowledge, Understanding, and Wisdom Radio. We're talking about propaganda and predictive programming, paradigmatics. This is all in light of some things that have been coming out in the media recently. I want to just really state, this is just me speaking, right? One of the things, let's take a look at propaganda, and it's one of its most effective measures, is that, and respect to all those who have chosen to become vaccinated. I respect your decision. That's your decision. I personally don't agree with it. I respect if that's what you feel you need to do, by all means, follow through with that. But when we look at what the media has done to persuade people to go to get those particular vaccinations, is that they use fear to cripple critical thought. Because when you really think about it, when you look at what vaccines go through to become FDA approved, it is years of trials because they want to know the long range effects of what this vaccine can do. Well, the time wasn't able to be done to really get a good look at what was going to take place with this particular vaccine because it was an Operation Warp Speed process. And again, respect to those who chose to do that. But it's like when you're dealing with fear, when you're dealing with information being repeated over and over and over and over, and you're threatened like you can't do this, you can't do that unless A, B, and C are fulfilled, well, then you're going to be persuaded to go about fulfilling this suggestion, which is actually a dictate. It's actually a dictate, but it's just presented in a form of a suggestion. And so the mind is then persuaded, especially if you're tuned into the propaganda on television, to go about doing what is done or what is suggested. And so this is where we have to appeal to the enlightened and intellectual of mind in propaganda and information. And you have to do the research yourself. We have to do that. I think of someone, my aunt, may she rest in peace, peace be upon her, who was diagnosed with an ovarian cancer and just followed the information that was given by her healthcare managers. Never really taken within her own power to do research herself and to figure out what she can also do to assist in her healing process. And I'm not faulting her because that is where people are in certain positions and places in their life, but at the same time, we all have to understand we are responsible for ourselves. That's one thing that this country and really human rights, natural law is all about. Sovereignty. It's all about having the ability. And this is what a republic form of government is about. You have the right to go about your life, your liberty, your ownership of property, and your pursuit of peace as you choose, as long as you're not harming someone, as long as you're not jeopardizing someone else's well-being and damaging someone's property. You have the right to go about living your life however you so choose in a republic. But in a democracy, the majority rule, and if you are not actually following the role of the majority, then you are going to succumb to their particular decision. I'm getting a call. Give me 1 second. All right, thank you. I had a little call. I got another appointment pretty much right after this. So just again, looking at how propaganda works, it's about using information to persuade people to do things that it's repeated over, it appeals to passions, it makes you just disable your critical thought. And so 3 things that really stimulated this particular paradigmatic for me was the Weeknd's performance at the Super Bowl, Cardi B and Meg Thee Stallion's performance at the Grammys, and most recently, the Lil Nas X video, Montero. And it's like when we look at these 3 things, what is being presented are lifestyles and behaviors that really challenge traditional standards, if you will. They challenge years of morality that have, been upheld in various cultural societies and civilizations. And so when we look at these 3 performances, it really is intent on propagating information or lifestyles that is going to challenge these norms. There's an article from a website called the Vigilant Citizen that I want to share and read in portion, just the conclusion more than anything. I think the conclusion captures the basis of the entirety of what this most recent video by Little Nas X is all about. It's a very interesting article. I will have it on the blog shiftingparadigms.wordpress.com that you can go and check out. But the conclusion, and also in light of the shoes that he came out with, the Satan shoes that Nike is actually now suing him over because he was saying that they have a drop of human blood in the sole of the shoe, right? So, these things he's presenting that are very interesting. But I just want to read this conclusion to this article by this individual by the name of Vigilant Citizen. It's called The Occult Meaning of Little Nas X's Montero and the Symbolism of His Satan Shoes. This is by Vigilant Citizen. I'm going to read this from my phone because it's slowing down my computer. In conclusion, Little Nas X's first hit, Old Town Road, was a mega hit. Let me turn it sideways. That was particularly loved by children, he says. As with nearly every celebrity that is popular with young people, LNX was recruited by the elite to propagate, there's that word, propaganda, to propagate its toxic agenda. The video Montero manages to combine all of the toxicity the elite wants to indoctrinate the youth with. Hypersexualization, this is the propaganda. This is what their agenda is. They want to promote and propagate society with hypersexualization, gender blurring, and the promotion of Satanism as a core religion. And we just read how these atrocities are being perpetrated in the name of God in the most cynical kind of realpolitik, which is treated as a matter of religious principle and patriotic duty. So anything that goes against these particular promotions of lifestyles that is coming out is considered hate speech. It's unpatriotic. It's not human. Not that you just have the right to disagree with that particular style of life yourself, but if you speak against that, now you're labeled a hater, a literal hater. And that's how propaganda works. Continuing on, contrary to what is being said in mass media about this song, nothing about it is empowering or liberating. It's all about slavery. In the video, LNX is a literal sex worker for Satan. The two other leading figures in rap right now are Cardi B and Meg Thee Stallion. They are also being praised for their playing the roles of prostitutes in a music video, which is being propagated as something that is empowerment for women, because you have now sexual liberation and you can express your body sexually if you so choose, and that is liberating for you. Is Black culture truly being empowered right now is the question. Or is it being pimped by the elite? One thing that most revolutionary leaders look at is the role and the condition of women in society. Based on the condition of women, you can tell the condition of that nation, if that nation is going to be a free nation or if that nation is going to be an enslaved nation, a nation that is dragged down by crass materialism, because the over-sexualization of any gender in society creates an imbalance. And that's what we have to find in society, is the balance. What is the balance of this? Okay. As LNX says himself in the video, Montero, it is definitely a sign of the times. The scene where he grinds on the devil is as symbolic as it is visceral. It encapsulates everything that is wrong, toxic, and debased in popular culture today that is being propagated. It reflects the dark minds of those who control the music industry and the sick messages it is looking to indoctrinate young people with. And the fact that mass media is celebrating this thing is quite telling. On one hand, they are censoring speech, canceling people, and burning books that go slightly against its agenda. On the other hand, they talk about free speech when defending WAP, Cuties, a movie promoting the sexualization of 11-year-old children twerking, and El Diablo, a Eurovision song about being in love with the devil. Not to mention the Lucifer series that's now on Netflix as well. I believe it comes on Fox. In short, Montero is a blatant confirmation of everything that has been described on the Vigilant Citizen site for years. If watching LNX grinding on Satan doesn't convince you that there's an agenda going on, then absolutely nothing will. Okay, so that's just food for thought there. So we have to take a look at these things a little more critically. We have to really stop being so passionate about matters and start being more rational about matters. Although your passions are there for reasons. Those are things that allow you to get a pulse or a temperature of what is going on around you and even within you. And you need to pay attention to that. If you're getting passionate and you're getting, starting to get a little, you know, like turned up, so to speak. Well, you have to analyze that. What is the reason why I'm getting so turned up about this matter? And then what is the purpose of me being turned up about this matter? And then how do I channel this into a delivery that is going to be something that is going to be rational and reasonable and get to a outcome that is beneficial not only for self but for others as well. So it's not about just doing things that you feel like doing. It's about doing what you need to do and what you know is actually positive and true. We can talk about right and wrong, but that's just, a matter of perspective at times. But when you get into what is true, when you get into what is reality, when you get into these principles, what is positive, right? What is light, then that's where things get a little more clear. Right and wrong can just be a matter of perspective, but let's deal with the principles. And so to really get behind this a little more, we've been talking about, Edward Bernays, and about how he is the father of public relations and how he used propaganda to promote agendas, and how Ardex Huxley talked about you have the intelligent, enlightened interests that are promoted to those who are being elevated in society. And then you have the passionate propaganda that is being promoted to keep others who are not desired to elevate down and suppress on that lower chakra level. So what you're dealing with again here is chakric energy. You're dealing with the energy of the chakras, because most stuff you're watching on television and listening to in music is stimulating your energy levels from your heart down. Okay, and that is keeping you in your human and in your animal or beastly nature. And I've said this once, I've said this several times on Shifting Paradigms, because what the powers that be do not desire for the masses of humanity to awaken to is to operate from their throat chakras up to their crown. So that's why the foods that you eat that are being propagated in society are toxifying. They're keeping you in toxicity, right? That's why the water you're drinking is laced with chlorine and things like that to keep you from having your pineal gland being able to secrete its essence, which is a huge part of being anointed within. And that's a whole different story that we can get to at another time. But I want to read an excerpt from this book by this man named John Coleman. It's called Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, Shaping the Moral, Spiritual, Cultural, and Political Decline of the United States. This is a very profound book that you can find on one of my other blogs. It's called HebrewVisionNews.blogspot.com. It's actually the most current post that's up there. You can check that out and see what this book is talking about. But in this chapter that John Coleman is speaking about, he is saying that political language is designed to make lies sound truthful and murder respectable, and to give the appearance of solidity to pure win. So it is to invert things. And this is what we have to understand. Most of the world today is operating in a shadow world, in an inverted world, where things that are quote unquote considered good are now considered evil, and things that are evil are now considered good. And this was written about thousands of years ago. The times that we live in now were written about thousands of years ago, as we were told what would happen as the age comes to its end. And I don't mean the end of the world, I mean the end of an age where the lower vibration is going to finally be overcome and transcended by the higher vibrations of humanity. Because this is about now the rebirth of humanity. But before we get to that, we have to go through these dirges of darkness to get to this height of light. But as his German counterpart Musenberg said, all news is lies, and all propaganda is disguised as news. This is what John Coleman is writing. All news is lies, and all propaganda is disguised as news. It is useful to know about Musenberg, as it helps us to understand how politicians operate. This is what the David Rockefeller quote was all about. and how secret forces control access to information, and how public opinion is shaped and molded. Bernays, we just talked about Edward Bernays, certainly followed the master and never deviated from his methodology. Without knowing these things, we can never understand how President George Bush is able to do things he does and not to have faced the consequences. It's the same thing really from every president. When you look at all the war crimes that these presidents have committed, these bombings, these civilian bombings, which are war crimes, you know, although they consider it collateral damage, those are war crimes. But they get away with it because the propaganda that society promotes gets these boogeymen in place that they put the scapegoat on once again. And so now our critical thinking is disabled because we're now induced to fear this boogeyman that is out to get everybody, but they're not out to get everybody. They're out to get those powers and forces that are truly seek to imbalance the world. But that's how nature works. Nature always has a remedy to bring balance to the world. And I'm not promoting any extremist type of activity whatsoever. So please understand that. I do not promote extremists. I promote peace. I promote life. I promote love. I promote righteousness. I promote truth and justice and equity. That's what will get humanity to the next level. Right? But I do promote the ability to defend yourself at the same time. And you have to defend yourself. Continuing on. It has certainly enabled me, John Coleman, to trace the origin of the so-called neo. Starting to break up on me, huh? Is it back? Back in it? Okay, thank you. So Tavistock Institute remains the mother of all research facilities connected with behavior modifications, opinion making, and shaping of political events. What Tavistock did was to create a black hole of deception in the 20th century. Its task would have been made a great deal more difficult had it not been for the prostitution of the media and its role in disseminating the gospel according to George Orwell. George Orwell was the author of 1984, the coiner of the term Big Brother, which gives us, you know, the all-seeing eye of the media or the technology. And so that is going back to that. But Tavistock Institute is that institute which is sought to shape all of those different spheres of human activity in the United States in particular. But Lord Northcliffe, the chief of Tavistock's predecessor, the Wellington House, had been a media mogul, and at one stage went so far as to ship a fleet of thousands of copies of his Daily Mail to France each week, and then have them delivered by a fleet of motor trucks to British troops at the front lines to win their hearts and minds in support of the war. That is the whole objective of war. The objective of war is to win the hearts and the minds of the people. If you can do that without delivering a blow, you have successfully defeated the people by convincing them to accept the perspective of the aggressor. That is what the outcome of war has always been, to win the hearts of the minds of the people. If we can't do that by diplomacy, well, we will do that by destruction. And that is how dominance goes. Continuing on. In the United States here especially, it has been virtually taken over by MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. It's been overtaken by Stanford Research, Esalen Institute, and the Wharton School of Economics, the Hudson Institute, Kissinger Associates, Duke University, and many more institutions we have come to think of as wholly American. The RAND Research and Development Corporation, under the tutelage of Tavistock, has had a profound influence on so many institutions. So this isn't just individuals. This is institutions that work in segments of our society who are intent on persuading the people to be subject to dictatorship. Ultimately, that's what it is. This is what the one world globalization order is all about. As one of the principal research institutions directly controlled by Tavistock, RAND runs our ICBM, Intercontinental Ballistic Missile Program. It does prime analysis for U.S. foreign policymakers and advises on nuclear policies. It does hundreds of projects for the CIA in the field of mind control. Some of RAND's clients include AT&T, Chase Manhattan Bank, the U.S. Air Force, the U.S. Department of Energy, and BM Rand is one of the major Tavistock-controlled institutions in the world and working on brainwashing at all levels, including government, military, religious organizations, okay? And so when we look and take all of this into perspective, we have to see through the narrow lens of agendas. And that's something that we have to really look at in light of everything that is taking place today. What is the outcome of this? What's the intent of this stuff? Because when we're just sitting and being entertained and accepting things at face value, well, what is the purpose of it? Why are these things being promoted? Why are these things being cast in our face so often and so repeatedly? What's the purpose of that? Well, there's an agenda behind it. I was going to get into predictive programming, but I'm going to hold off on predictive programming because that is something that, speaks for itself. But predictive programming is basically just seeing things in the media or in a movie, and eventually you see it carried out in real life. So in the movie Long Kiss Goodnight, which featured Gina Davis and Samuel Jackson and some other people, this came out in the 90s. But in the 90s, they had talked about blowing up the World Trade Center and blaming it on the Muslims. This is in the movie. It was in the original cut of the movie, the editor's cut. But since 2001, that scene has been edited out the movie. But that was in the movie. It was, in fact, the scene when Gina Davis is on a water wheel, and the person who worked with the government was causing her to go under the water as a form of torture, because she was a spy, actually, in the movie. And they were torturing her to get her to confess something, but he was also confessing himself about some things that he was planning to do to bring forth an order that he wanted, okay? And so by destroying the World Trade Center and blaming it on Muslims, it would give them access to all types of budgetary expenses and the ability to write policies that would be in their favor. This is in the movie Long Kiss Goodnight. In the 90s, this came out. And so that is predictive programming. When you look at Back to the Future, and you see Donald Trump as the president of the United States in Back to the Future, or really The Simpsons, and you see that in The Simpsons, well, that's predictive programming. Because what they're doing is they're setting the masses up to receive something that had already been in the works for years. We had talked about in our politics paradigmatics that nothing in politics happens by coincidence. It is a scientific plan to unfold. So let me continue on as time is getting down to this hour. There's an article from a UK website, The Independent, which is one of the main periodicals in the United Kingdom. It's called Washington, D.C.'s Role Behind the Scenes in Hollywood Goes Deeper Than You Think. This is by Matthew Alford, which was written in 2017. He says the U.S. government and Hollywood have always been close. D.C. has long been a source of intriguing plots for filmmakers, and L.A. has been a generous provider of glamour and glitz to the political class. But how dependent are these two centers of American influence? Scrutiny of previously hidden documents reveals that the answer is very. We can now show that the relationship between U.S. national security and Hollywood is much deeper and more political than anyone has ever acknowledged. It is a matter of public record. I'm going to end on this particular paragraph. It is a matter of public record that the Pentagon has had an entertainment liaison office since 1948. The CIA established a similar position in 1996. Although it was known that they sometimes request script changes in exchange for advice, permission to use locations and equipment such as aircraft carriers, each appeared to have passive and largely apolitical roles. On television, we found over 1,100 titles received Pentagon backing, 900 of them since 2005, from Flight 93 to Ice Road Truckers to Army. So this influence between government and Hollywood has been around easily since 1948, as we know. But if we go back prior to 1948 and you look at societies like the Nazi society, well, you understand how propaganda was a part of their whole governmental agenda. The media was used exclusively to foment the crusade that they carried out against religious Jews, not secular Jews, against religious Jews. And so propaganda in media, in government, has been in tandem since, I don't know, we can really go back to the Roman bread and circus matter. When you look at what Rome did, and they used gladiators, and they used feasts and things like that to keep the people distracted from what was going on behind the scenes by the 1% who ruled and controlled and owned all of society. Well, then you can see how this is just an extension of that to this very day. And it's so interesting because one thing I wanted to kind of wrap up with is this: Hollywood. What is Hollywood? Hollywood is a bunch of magicians, to put it simply. How are they magicians? Because they make images seemingly appear out of the air. They have plots and stories that they tell, and they actually use distraction and manipulation to cause the mind to believe that fantasy is reality. That is what magic does. But Hollywood, they chose that very, very intentionally, because holly was a tree that was used by druids. These were wizards, right? By druids who were known for being priests and wizards. The character Merlin in the legend of the King Arthur was a druid wizard, and he used a wand made of Hollywood. The wood, holly, was used because of its vibratory resonance that had the ability to influence certain members of our minds and our body, but that was used to divert, attention. The wand is used to make you look over here while something else is being done over there. Okay, so Hollywood movies are forms of sorcery using psychology, subliminal messages, and manifestation through what is known as lesser magic and bewitchment. Today, you can look this up, many actors in Hollywood practice witchcraft and Kabbalah, which again goes back to these videos. Like when you look at what's going on behind the scenes, many of these performers and these entertainers and these artists, if you will, are signed by ARs. ARs are recruiters of talent to go in and to fit different images that the executive label wants to promote. And in so doing, they find talented people who they can use to promote the agenda of that particular label. And these labels have long histories of having witch covens in them. In fact, there's many people who can tell you about, I forgot the individual's name, but they're backmasking music or messages in the song. And this has been done from the Beatles' White Album. This is what prompted Charles Manson to go on his killing spree. He heard a message in the White Album that the Beatles released that led him on his killing spree, because he tuned in to the message that was subliminally encoded in the music. But when you look at what hip hop has done in our society, and when gangster rap came out, when NWA came out, and you look at, where the gangs just happened to come out at that time too, in the late 80s, early 90s, well, you see how the influence of that reflected on the street. Now you can say, does art reflect society or does society reflect art? Well, it's both, but you have to understand that propaganda has a specific role of addressing issues, or not addressing issues, of persuading people to carry out certain agendas. Okay, and so these agendas have clear demarcations and manifestations in society when we are able to see the patterns that are behind them. And so looking at Hollywood, Hollywood has always been a promoter of messages and agendas that are intent on keeping people distracted from issues. But if you're paying attention to the messages in the movies, you can see that there's always a deeper underlying message that's in there. So let's take the movie in the book, The Wizard of Oz by Frank Baum. What Frank Baum was seeking to do was tell the people what had taken place in 1913 with the signing of the Federal Reserve Act, and how Oz, Ounce, O-Z, the Wizard of Oz, the Wizard of Ounces, was about the gold. Follow the yellow brick road. But this Emerald City now, this greenback, this dollar bill was now the ruling force of society. But behind a curtain, you got this coward who is just keeping the people opiated with these poppies and stuff, keeping them on drugs and distracted with wizardry. This is what the Wicked Witch is all about, keeping them under this mist of illusion, right? But her slippers in the book were silver, and she had to follow the yellow brick road of the gold to get to who is really pulling the strings. You want to follow anything, follow the money, and that's where you will see what is taking place. But he was trying to tell society, this is the spell that is being cast on you. This is the spell. The Wizard of Oz was not just a fantasy novel. It was a really, what would you call that? A science reality novel. Some would call it sci-fi, but it was science reality because he just cloaked it in these allegories, you know, that was telling a story of what was going on in his day with the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 under Woodrow Wilson. And so when you understand the deeper meaning behind the messages that are in movies and in books and in papers and on radio, then you can start to really see how propaganda is being used. There's good propaganda for the intellectual, the enlightened society. And then there's the negative propaganda that is the passionate based propaganda that's keeping people in that place of lower resonance of vibratory frequencies. And so you have to be able to discern through that. And it's really simple once you see the formula. But you have to be able to be like Neo in the Matrix and see the code, the algorithms, if you will. You got to see all these things in operation so that you can make sense, a critical thought, a critical decision for the good and the benefit of yourself and society. And so we have to see through the propaganda and the predictive programming that is present, because it's so present in our society right now. And the target, the bullseye, is our children. That is what was being sought. Hitler once said, if you give me the children, I will give you a future, you know, that will never be able to be changed. And so he knows that. And the people who are behind the scenes know that if we can get these children to think this way, or not to think, but to believe this way, because they're not going to think about it. They're just going to get programmed, right? Then we'll capture the future and do with it as we wish. But if you get your children to think, if you become one who's a critical thinker and you see through the veneer and the veil that is being in the sheepskin, the wolfskin is being pulled over your eyes, and you can start to see what's real and what's not, because this is where we are in time right now. We have to deal with what is reality versus what is illusion. We have to understand who we are as human beings, what our purpose is as human beings. What does a Homo sapien mean? A Homo sapien means to be a wise and sagacious person as a human. To be wise and sagacious. That's what a Homo sapien is. It comes from the word sapient or sapience, to be wise. That is what our purpose is on this earth, because we are, yes, animals, but we also have an evolutionary development that has caused us to get to this higher form of cognitive functionality. When we're operating from this reptilian brain and the limbic brain, where we're still operating as animals, but that neocortex in our brain is that critical thinking and that connection with the universals, with the cosmos, with consciousness, with the source of consciousness, if you will. But if you're subject to this propaganda, you'll never tap into that. You're being predictively programmed. That's why they call it television programming, because yes, there's programs that come on television, but the real programming that is being done is on the viewer. And that's where we have to actually get beyond, to see clear, and to make sense of what's going on in this world, because they're telling you the story if you're paying attention to it. They're giving up the information to those who are enlightened, they're able to see it. But of course, people like that are labeled conspiracy theorists. That's the crazies that Dave Chappelle was talking about in the beginning. Not considering the culture that is being espoused and promoted and propagated, but those who go against the grain, the salmon that swim upstream and don't follow the mainstream, you're crazy. That's what they'll tell you. You're crazy. You're a conspiracy theorist. When in fact, you're thinking, you're using the noodles that the Most High has given you. And that's what you have to do. You got to use these things. You're operating from here in your passions, and you feel it in your gut, and you feel it in your lower extremities, in your genital area, and your lower chakras are on fire, but your upper chakras are just dead and mute and stagnant and blocked. They got you. They got you. And so we got to find ways to get ungot and to tap into true Wi-Fi. That's why my last episode was called "The Body is Technology." We got technology that far supersedes anything that we use device-wise. This is the real technology. You are the real technology, and you got a source that you can tap into if you can afford it, right? Through prayer, through meditation, through study, and through application. If you can afford your connection, then you can transcend everything that's taking place right now on this earth, in the world, with technology, because they're trapping you. You may be in an open society, but you're trapped because you're tuned in to the wrong messages. That propaganda and predictive programming paradigm got you stuck. And I can say I have stuck ways too, you know, and we have to all acknowledge this and work with this together. So this is what programming, predictive programming, and propaganda paradigmatics is all about. I'm B. Michael, your host for Shifting Paradigms. This is National Poetry Month, so next week, next week, because I had some technical difficulties from last week, we're gonna bring some poetry, the paradigmatics to the forefront, and deal with some good spoken word and maybe some good spoken word artists. This is Poetry Month. April is National Poetry Month, so we're definitely going to promote that and get that going. But I want to thank BFTAA for sponsoring this dynamic radio station, KUAW, Knowledge, Understanding, and Wisdom. Thank Baba G for holding it down and keeping it up as always. I want to thank you all, the listeners and viewers, for tuning in to Shifting Paradigms. Share this, please do. Go to my blog, Shifting Paradigms, no vowels at all, shiftingparadigms.wordpress.com. No vowels in the word Shifting Paradigms, shiftingparadigms.wordpress.com. You can check out all the information. Be Michael there, and tune in there. We'll be back next week, again, with some poetry paradigmatics. Mind over matter meditation on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. It wasn't this morning, but we'll be getting back into that as well. Tune into that. But tune into KUAW, where knowledge, understanding, and wisdom reign supreme. This is B. Michael, your host for Shifting Paradigm, signing off. Peace, power, blessings, one life, one love. Shalom, shalom.